Welcome. My name is Jack Hakimian, and I'm excited to be here live with Don, Torrez, and Glen. And Don and Glen are basically two accessibility experts that I'm excited to be able to work with. Don Torrez is a certified ADA coordinator and a web accessibility specialist. His expertise is helping for-profit and nonprofit organizations facing lawsuits to prevent and mitigate accessibility complaints. He's also certified with the ADA Coordinator Training Certification Program at the University of Missouri. And Mr. Walker, Glen Walker, is also an accessibility expert and an accessibility architect. He works with designers, developers, and testers to implement accessibility into the applications by reviewing designs and auditing websites for web content accessibility guideline. He also teaches classes on web accessibility and screen readers. He received a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from North Carolina State University. And I know that Glen recently got his official certification with the International, let me see here, it's the International Web Accessibility Organization. Let me see, what is, did I get that right? The International Association of Accessibility Professionals. I'm sorry for ripping that apart. And so I'm definitely want to hear more about that, Glen, and what that entailed and what that's about. So again, Don, how are you? How are you doing in Kansas? If you could tell us a little bit about what has motivated you to get into this industry.
Absolutely. I'm Don Torrez. I'm a product manager for a software product. And in that vein, I began working with clients and mostly in the municipal space, but also in retail, talking to clients about things that were on their mind. And when I began talking to them about their websites and their technology, the primary concerns they had were around security and accessibility. The more we talked to them, the more accessibility kept coming up as something that, you know, it's the future. If you want to make sure that your websites and your electronic communication is for everyone, it's very important to make sure that you comply for all of your market, including those with disabilities.
Okay, nice. And Glen, tell us a little bit about you and what was your motivation and passion to get into this industry?
Hi, I'm Glen Walker. I'm an accessibility expert, and I have a computer science background, and I worked as a software engineer for many years. And as many software engineers do when they're coding, they rely on a keyboard pretty often, and don't use the mouse quite as often. So that was kind of my introduction into accessibility. There are many assistive technologies that rely on using a keyboard, such as a screen reader. And so if you can get keyboard access working correctly, that goes a long way with getting accessibility working. So that was my intro to accessibility, was just to get things working with the keyboard. And so I've been gradually expanding that, and over a course of about a dozen years now, have included screen readers, and there's other types of assistive technology. For example, people with low vision might need a screen magnifier, or some visually impaired users use Braille readers. And it's a very fascinating technology that you can have a Bluetooth Braille device attached to your computer, and as you're navigating through a website, there's pins that pop up, the Braille dots, and so you can actually read the website using Braille, as long as you've coded your website properly. It's really fascinating.
Wow. And so, for the people who are watching, what is accessibility? I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, what are we talking about when we talk about accessibility?
Well, initially, accessibility, a lot of people may think of it, for those that have heard of accessibility, may think, oh, that's just making sure my website's going to work well for people with disabilities. And yes, that is one of the factors. But really, accessibility is more about inclusive design, which is designing, whether it's a website or it could be, a building or whatever public accommodation it might be. In our particular case, we're talking about digital accessibility, so mainly websites. But it's designing the website so that the greatest number of people can use and access that website. And I mentioned, people maybe with low vision or blind users or hearing impaired. If you happen to have a video on your website and there are no closed captions, then people with limited hearing are not going to benefit from that video. But also, let's say you're in the gym, a very noisy environment, and you have your mobile device in front of you while you're on the treadmill, and you want to watch a video from a company website. If there are no closed captions, typically you're not going to be able to hear that video because it's very noisy around you. So having captions on, even though you may not be hearing impaired, it's an inclusive design because it's including all different types of environments and settings and any conditions that may happen. So accessibility is more about inclusive design, and it's a way to create websites that can be used in all different kinds of environments and by all different types of people.
Nice. Don, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Glenn said about accessibility is for everyone. The better we get at identifying what could be an obstacle between us and electronic communication, the more this includes everybody. And the future is so exciting. We're just getting to a point where everyone can be included, and what you need to communicate is best communicated to everybody. And so accessibility can be a little bit intimidating at first, but when you realize that creating your site or your electronic communication in the right way, it's not as tricky as it sounds, and it's just a way of including everybody.
Awesome. Now I know that there's been a lot of companies that have been sued out there. For example, Target, E-Trade, H&R Block, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, MIT, Harvard. I mean, the list goes on. And I know there's been a lot of litigation here in the state of Florida. And in your experience, Don, I know that you work with a lot of municipalities and for-profit companies. What are some of the concerns that the companies and the organizations you're working with have as it relates to accessibility?
Well, the organizations I've worked with, first of all, one thing that they unanimously share is they really want to do the right thing. Where they get frustrated is they don't always know what the right thing is. And in the case of, like you say, in the retail space, Winn-Dixie had a lawsuit that went all the way to verdict and was found against Winn-Dixie because the ordering and the types of things that you could do online was not accessible to everyone. So they really wanted to be part of the future. They didn't build that in such a way everyone could appreciate. And so that's where the help is you get someone who really wants to do the right thing, and they just need help with it.
Yeah. And I know, Glenn, you in our conversations with you've really shared a concern from the user end that basically that this needs to be this service needs to take place not just out of a concern for litigation, but also a concern for the user and really compassion driven motif there. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that concern has kind of driven your work?
Sure. Yeah. It's hard to when you think about when you're designing your website and whether or not you, for lack of a better word, if you care about accessibility, you kind of have to think of it as and think in mindset, is it okay for me to exclude certain users from accessing my website? And typically, if you ask a question like that, the answer is no. I mean, you don't really want to intentionally exclude anyone from accessing your website, and especially if you're a business. Let's just do a real simple example. Let's say you're a pizza company, and you can order your pizza online. You have maybe your interface has a list of ingredients on maybe the left side of the web page, and you drag and drop your ingredients to the right side to build your pizza, right? And so you've built this interface that requires a mouse. You have to drag from the left side to the right side, Well, that's nice for people that can use a mouse, mobility, that have sight and all this. But what happens if you have someone who has difficulty using the mouse? It could be any kind of mobility impairment. It could be, for example, like Parkinson's, that has hand tremors, that may have difficulty in fine-tuning the mouse and dragging and dropping and pointing and clicking. For that user, being able to use a keyboard is much easier. They can just tab, select things in that manner. For a limited or a sight-impaired user, they may not use the mouse at all because they can't see the screen well enough. And so they need to be able to use a keyboard or a screen reader to do the same type of thing. Well, as a person with Parkinson's or a person with low vision, they have disposable income, right? I mean, they enjoy pizza. They want to enjoy a pizza. And so they want to be able to order it themselves. They don't want to have to go out and find somebody, oh, can you read the screen? Can you drag my pepperoni and onions to my pizza list? It's very empowering for someone to do things themselves. And it's a very satisfying feeling when you can design something that can be used by the greatest number of people.
Okay. And then, Don, I know there's a lot of accessibility companies out there that are basically getting involved in this market because there's a huge need. Technology, as we know, is expanding, and it's going to continue to expand even as the third world gets online. So the question I think that a lot of the companies and organizations we work with is, how do I test for accessibility? There's a lot of electronic means where you could kind of put your website domain into it and hit submit, and you get a report instantly, or sometimes 24 hours later. From your expertise, what do you believe is the best methods of testing?
Well, the electronic scans are a great start, and I would always encourage somebody to start there. But if there's one theme that we've been talking about today, accessibility is about people. And so there's really no substitute for having a human being to go through your website and to look at some of the key pages and most used pages and tell you what they're seeing. So the scans are a good start, but it really takes a good eye and someone who's looked at websites before to look at your site and tell you what they experience, interpret the scans. The electronic scans are pretty good, but they have a tendency towards some false positives, and a person can really tell you how accessible the site is best. Okay.
How about you, Glenn? What's your thoughts on testing?
Well, that's an excellent point, Don. And to expand on that, including a human being in the testing, it's fantastic if you can have a variety of different people testing. So you may want to bring people in that have a visual impairment, right, to try your site out and to see how a native screen reader user accesses the site. So yeah, it's fabulous to include people into it. One thing we hadn't talked about yet, but when you talk about how do you test for accessibility, well, typically when you test for something, you're trying to measure something, right? How do you test? How do you know if something is not working when you're testing it if you're not quite sure what you're really testing for or how to measure it? And so when measuring accessibility, there's the W3C, which is a consortium of individuals and companies that create all the different various requirements related to web. They defined HTML language, CSS, JavaScript, all these different things related to the web. The W3C has also created a guideline called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. And those initially came out in 1999. That was version 1. And then 10 years later, in 2009, WCAG 2.0 was released. And it's technology agnostic in that the guidelines don't talk about HTML specifically. They talk about guidelines of here are things you can do when you design, whether it's a mobile app or a desktop app or a website, whatever the case may be. Here are guidelines you can follow that will make your website the most accessible. And there's different levels of accessibility in these guidelines. And there's single A, double A, and triple A. So most companies and most countries' laws focus on AA, which is kind of that middle level. So if you want to measure and test for accessibility and you're looking at this AA level, there are 38 different requirements. They're called success criteria. Excuse me, success criteria that you can test for. And so you can, if you want to, physically just go down a checklist of 38 items and go, okay, you know, this one works, oh, I'm having trouble with this one. And there's different ways to test for these AA requirements, 38 success requirements. And just to point out one quick one, you can try tabbing through your interface with a keyboard. Don't use your mouse, just tab through, see if you can get to all the elements, all the links, all the buttons, whatever the interactive elements are on your page. Make sure you can get your focus on these elements using the keyboard, and that you can select the elements and it does what you expect.
Okay. I didn't know there was AAA. That's you don't find that stressed a lot in as far as WCAG standards.
Right, the AAA. Well, the standards themselves, when you read about AAA, the W3C does not recommend trying to achieve AAA because technically it can't. Because if you try to fulfill all the requirements of AAA, it will satisfy some groups of people, but will actually hurt other groups of people. But there are certain requirements or certain success criteria in AAA that if you follow those, it makes your website even better. And just one example is one of the AA requirements is to have a sufficient color contrast on your website. And what that's talking about is the text color that you're using compared to the background color of your page. There has to be a sufficient enough difference between those two colors for people with lower vision or with color deficient vision, which we often refer to as colorblind, that they can be able to read the text page easier. So there's a certain ratio for this color contrast that's at AA. It's a higher contrast ratio at AAA, which for people with even lower vision, they could still may be able to see or can detect there are certain elements on the page. So the AAA is really nice in some respects. One other example for AAA, for links on your page, a AA requirement is that that your links make sense in context. So that if you had like a paragraph of text, and at the end of that paragraph it said, click here for more information. Well, in general, click here, taken by itself, doesn't make much sense to a screen reader user. They're just going to hear click here. Well, click here for what? But if you read it in context of the paragraph, it makes sense. And that's kind of a AA requirement. A AAA requirement says that your link text taken by itself makes sense just by itself, which makes your page more clear. So instead of saying click here for more information, the link itself could just say, for more information about Global Presence Network, and the Global Presence Network is your link. And so it's the link text, and that would be a AAA requirement. That is a great thing to implement for your site.
Okay. And I know, Don, you write a lot of training manuals for organizations, and are those manuals related to specific issues of code that Glen is referring to, or do you deal more with administrative and kind of publishing practices for organizations as far as best practices? I mean, what is your training and a lot of your organizational workshops entail?
Well, we start strategically, so we start at the very top. Things, simple, basic requirements like creating an accessibility policy, how to make your accessibility page something that everyone can find easily, writing an accessibility statement and what criteria to use, all the way down to the code level requirements that we discussed earlier. So it really starts at high level and works all the way down. And we describe WCAG as kind of a bullseye where AAA is in the middle and AA is a little bit wider, and then A would be wider than that. And so when you're aiming at it, safe harbor legally is generally thought to be AA. That's what the Department of Justice and the Office of Civil Rights would call out. And so when we think about training and walking a client through how to do this themselves, we start at a very high level with your basic accessibility approach, and then slowly work down until we're discussing code. Because I know when we start talking about code, it can be intimidating to a user who doesn't do the coding themselves, but just manages the website. So we try to make sure that our approach is for everybody, even the not so technical user.
Okay. And then Glenn, what is the number one issue that that you find when you analyze a site and you kind of give them the results? What are some of the main issues that organizational websites have?
Yeah, there's actually, I don't know if there's like a number one problem. There are a couple that are very common on sites. And one, as I mentioned before, when I'm testing with a keyboard, sometimes if you try to create your own sort of custom element on your page, whether it's for styling or whatever the reason may be, so you're not using native HTML semantics like a button or an input type equals checkbox, but instead if you're using span tags or div tags and styling things to make it look like a button or a checkbox. A lot of times in these cases, these custom elements do not allow the keyboard to navigate to them. And even if you can navigate to them, sometimes whatever the expected keyboard operation is to select it does not work. For example, there's kind of a minor difference between buttons and links that you may not be aware of. When I tab to a link, I can press enter to select that link. If I tab to a button, I should be able to press space bar or enter to select that link, to select that button. And so if you have a custom button, and let's say and you can navigate to it, but when you get to it, if only enter works and spacebar doesn't, that's going to be very confusing for a screen reader user, because they will hear that they've put their focus on a button, and the screen reader itself will tell the user, press spacebar to select the button.
Okay.
So if you have not implemented that properly, that can be very confusing. So keyboard, being able to access things with a keyboard is one of the common things. Another common problem is when you have forms that maybe visually have a label next to each form element. Maybe you're filling out, a name and address, and maybe you're shipping something, you're buying something and having it shipped to you. If physically on the screen you have labels next to your fields, that does not necessarily mean you have properly associated those labels with the fields. And if they're not properly associated, then a screen reader user, when they navigate to those fields, will just hear blank, 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 blank. They won't know what the purpose of that field is. And it's a real simple code change in HTML. If you're using proper HTML, it'll work. But not having things labeled is a very, very common issue.
Okay, good. And so basically, when it comes to testing, are both of you able to provide end-to-end testing? I don't know if you I don't know if you want to elaborate on that a little bit, Don.
Yeah, I can. And my approach is, as Glenn said, to actually use assistive technology to test it. You can have a scan, and the scan works well to kind of help narrow your focus of the testing. But pulling up assistive technology and using it, making sure you can navigate the site without a keyboard, using various screen readers and different browsers help. So yeah, that's my approach, and I can test end to end.
Okay, good. And then my last question here is, what are some simple things that an organization can do to get their website ADA compliant and just more accessible? Just some simple steps.
Well, the first thing I would do is make sure that you have an easy to find accessibility statement and policy. If I'm vision impaired and I can't experience an aspect of the site, one of the first things I'd like to do is be able to know who to talk to about this and what the proper procedure is to make sure that the organization's aware. And so you want to build a road between you and a user who might have trouble experiencing your site so that they can tell you that. And that two-way communication really helps make your site literally more accessible.
Okay. Glenn, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, to expand on what Don said, so having an accessibility statement or an accessibility policy, oftentimes websites, at the bottom of the page, you have a footer with all kinds of various links on how to contact us, maybe jobs associated with the company, the history, things like that. If you can have a link there as well for accessibility, which can take you to, as Don mentioned, that company's policy on accessibility. In addition to that, on that same page where you talk about the accessibility, to have an easy way to send feedback. Most companies want to hear from customers, right? In fact, probably not most, probably all companies want to hear from their customers. And so if there are some issues on the page, or if there's a section of the website where someone's having difficulty, if they can even, if they drill down and they're several layers deep on your website, if at the bottom of that page is the same footer as on every other page, they can navigate to this accessibility link, click on that, find a contact us, and send information and feedback on what may be the problem on the website. And so, yes, having that statement there would be fantastic.
Nice. Great. And so if someone wants to get more consultation on their web accessibility issues and things like that, how can they get a hold of you? And Don, Glenn, how can they get a hold of you?
You can go through the Global Presence website and find us, and we would love to consult with you. This is a real passion of ours, and we really enjoy helping people become more accessible. It just makes the world a better place when everyone can access the website. So I would love to talk to you.
Great. All right. Well, again, I want to appreciate, first of all, I do appreciate just the hard work you guys have put in to learn the specifics. Of course, my role, my passion is more just helping organizations connect with the experts on our team that have really dedicated their life in a very niche, focused way to be good at what they do and to add value to people's lives. And I kind of rolled into this specific need when a lot of our health centers were being served with lawsuits and for not having accessible sites. And we realized that, hey, we need to get involved, not just to avoid litigation, but to serve a constituency or a customer base that is real. I think the last data I heard of the percentage of people with disabilities globally, I want to say it was like 2 billion. Can anyone correct me here? It was like 2 billion people globally that would say they have some type of disability, audio or visual or even maybe physical. And so this is a real demographic, real people that we need to be concerned about, not only out of compassion, but organizational growth, and also to avoid real costly lawsuits that can just be a headache on the administrative and executive team. Of course, lawyers are excited to litigate, but we should just avoid and prevent it all. So any last words as we wrap this up, Don?
Yeah, I think it's important to want to do the right thing, and sometimes you need help with that. So we'd be more than willing to help you know how to become accessible from a strategic standpoint all the way down to getting the code right.
Sure. Glenn, any last words?
Yeah, that number you mentioned, as far as the number of people with a disability in the world, in general, globally, different countries have different percentages, but if you kind of take everything as a whole, it's about 15%. And, so 15% of 7 billion people, almost 8 billion, 7.7 billion people on the planet, that's a lot of people.
Okay.
And that's a lot of these, how do you really measure the number of people with a disability on the planet? I mean, a lot of that is self identifying, and some people will not self-identify, or other people may not consider themselves having a disability. As we age and our eyesight reduces, and as we need some assistive technology to help read the screen, I don't consider myself disabled, but I do need accessibility features that help me read the page better. And so going back to very early on when we started, accessibility really is about inclusive design and creating websites that can be used by the greatest number of people and not necessarily based on disabilities.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, I appreciate you guys, and I'm looking forward to our next video chat discussion on this topic, and to get more specific, especially. And I love, Glenn, your detailed expertise, and I see you a lot on the forums, on the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, the IAAP website, really giving a lot of advice to developers and coders. So, I mean, I appreciate that. I see that you do that pro bono to some degree, and I know that as we work with companies that have developers and designers on their staff, you're going to be very beneficial in guiding them through their modifications or their new design concepts. So again, I appreciate both of you guys, and just the role that you guys play. And Don, just to see how you're traveling our nation and meeting with different organizations and municipalities and providing expert coaching and consulting and workshops. That's exciting, and I'm just excited to see how you're going to add value to so many people that we connect with. So again, thank you guys, and man, God bless you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Tom.
All right.